Topic ECG. Without further delay, I would like to call upon Dr. Muridhar Sharma sir, STMCA Udupi, to take over the session. Welcome to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think I'm audible and the screen is visible, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, we were discussing about the changes which are produced due to the ischemia and the infarction. Now, to highlight the same, like once the cell is injured in any of the cells, once the cell is injured, the conduction of the current will become abnormal over there. So what happens is, in a case of ischemic cell, because it cannot get polarized or it cannot get activated, like action potential doesn't form over the area properly, there will be some current conduction between these two cells, which is abnormal. And hence, that's what we call as the current of injury. Depending upon the direction in which the current is produced, the current wave produced either could be negative or maybe positive. So when a current is produced over the atrial area, atrial wall area, this kind of an injury occurs, then the ST segment tends to get inverted in case of, or depressed in case of the chest leads, whereas if it is in the ventricular area, it tends to get elevated. That's a very general statement. Now the same, whatever we have discussed, the same issue, a normal conduction, as the conduction occurs, you will have a normal T wave. In a case of ischemic cell, because the ischemic cell behaves abnormally, there will be an abnormal current formed, and this current produces the ST segment changes. When it is injured, the tissue is now in a moderately ischemic cell, the cell is alive and hence it still gets a partial action potential, but it has a membrane potential, but it doesn't have a action potential. Whereas when it becomes necrotic, the tissue is dead, then there will be no action potential. It will not have a membrane potential even, and hence there will be conduction of current across these two areas, and this produces a injury or a ST segment becoming flattened. Like so, ST segment gets elevated in an injured tissue, and when it becomes flattened, it becomes the same issue. And depending upon the position of these changes, we may consider whether it is a intramural pathology or transmural pathology. If it is a intramural, that's within the mucus area, the endometrial area, then the conduction of the current will be from the exterior to the interior, and hence there will be a ST depression. When the pathology, the lesion is on the exterior, the current conduction would be from within to the exterior. This becomes ST elevated. So ST elevation or the depression is depending upon the vector which is produced and depending upon the area where it is. Now that's one aspect. Now usually what happens is once there is an injury, at the time of the injury, the moment there is an injury, then the cells will come ischemic. It may not be dead. During that period, there will be a peak T wave. ST segment tends to get elevated. T wave becomes raised as the cell is behaving abnormally. Now, as time passes by, like a few minutes to hours, when the cells become now myocardial cells which have become ischemic, they tend to become more grievously injured, or they may be even to a certain extent dead. In that condition, there will be a notch formation due to that dead tissue, and this results in what we call as a current of injury. The current of injury is the notch formation either at the end of the S wave or it could be at the beginning of the P wave, depending upon the location where the injury has occurred. So, and this is exactly the same phenomenon that we had discussed in the previous slide, but I have given this in terms of the hours or time duration. After a few hours of the ischemia, you will have this current of injury. And this current of injury becomes quite prominent by about 24 hours when the tissue becomes totally dead, and this results in a notch formation, ST segment totally elevated or depressed depending upon the area seen. T wave tends to become inverted. As the condition becomes gradually, if the condition progresses well and the dead area is replaced by the fibrous tissue, which is having a membrane potential, the ST segment comes back to the original position, tends to come back to the original position, but the T wave remains inverted for a long time. Suppose the patient has recovered well by reperfusion, then the T wave becomes normal, but the PQ segment, it may show some abnormality remaining as such due to that certain area of the dead cell. This is how a course of myocardial infarction would occur, provided the patient has survived. Now, the same issue, ST segment elevation patterns, which could occur, could be of different pattern. It could be like a curvature, or raised and curved slightly, raised and oblong as such, or a flat and raised from the baseline, or it could be elevated, completely elevated, or a mountain-like curve. This is also called as mountain-like appearance. These are all the possible patterns of that ST segment elevation seen, which suggests about the ischemic changes or current of injury. Or at times, it could be like you may have ST segment elevation, and before the T wave is formed, there could be another depression, and this depression is often called as a U wave in between the ST segment and the T wave pattern area. This depression, notch formation, is also called as U wave. These are all nomenclature issues, but primarily, if at all I have to describe all these issues in a single sentence, there will be an abnormality of the ST segment pattern. And that ST segment pattern, once you have seen in any ECG, it has to be considered as a potential case of ischemia. Now, if at all you are interested in localizing the ischemia infarction, this table would help you to a certain extent. If the Q wave has you can see the current of injury in V1 and V2, the right leads, and then it's suggestive of a possible septal pathology. And along with the ST segment elevation, and the Q wave is in V1, V2, as well as the ST segment elevation in V4, V2, V6, that's involving almost whole of the chest area. Then it's the apical area, the superior area of the heart, and the extensor anterior area, it will produce the Q wave in V1 to V6 completely, and at times it could be in the ABL also to a certain extent. This is suggestive of the anterior, extensive anterior, or then again you will have further classification like limited anterior, where you will have Q waves in V1 to V6 as such, V2 significantly, V2 and V3 significantly, and then it's a limited anterior, very short duration or short location. Our lateral pathologies would be having the changes in V5 and V6 significantly in the left leads, then it's lateral. And when it is prominently lead 1 and lead 2 plus ABR, then it's suggestive of the inferior pathology or inferolateral. Of course, these kinds of the classification have lost their significance now, because all that final diagnosis is based off on angiography, because angiography has become popular. Practically, no one really bothers about these issues. All that you have to decide is whether there is an infarction or not. At the most, it could be limited to the anterior, posterior, and the lateral. That's all enough. But for a detail, if you want to have more detail, then that's the table which can help you. Now, again, some more examples. It's the same. I'm just repeating the same, just to highlight the issue. If a patient having an infarction, if he comes immediately, and as you see the changes in a few hours, like see, it's initially in the V1, you see the ST segment elevation. After a few hours, the same. It's a real-time issue. Whatever we have discussed, it's a repetition. The elevation becomes more, which suggests that there is an extension of the pathology. The condition is worsening, like. So the changes which can be seen in a few hours in a progressive pathology, when hyperacute T waves occur immediately after infarction, and the patient is observed that condition is progressing, there is no reperfusion. In that condition, you will see these kinds of changes as such. There is another abnormality which is quite important, is the Wellen syndrome. Wellen syndrome is a pattern of a biphasic T wave seen at the early stage. Now, particularly when it is seen in V2 and V4, that's the middle leads, then there is and along with it, but all the patient has a chest pain too, it's considered as a critical stenosis. And one of the important value, even if the ST segment is not elevated significantly, but a T wave abnormality in this condition should be considered as a possible potential predictor of ischemia. Most of the times, more than 75% of the patients of this kind would have a myocardial infarction developing and having a high risk of extensive myocardial infarction within next 2 to 3 weeks. So from the clinical point of view, whenever you see a ECG with a T wave abnormality, and even if the symptoms are relatively mild, you should be very cautious, and that patient has to be investigated further to confirm whether there is a obvious pathology or not. A potential risk case, this is what we call as potential risk case, because critical ST segment elevation is not very significant, but it's the T wave abnormality which is seen, and this condition is called as Wellen syndrome. Now, some more example of Wellen syndrome, same issue, Wellen syndrome, where you can see the same change of different pattern, a T wave being either biphasic or T wave being depressed, deep depression. So any of these variations can occur. These are the possible variations of the Wellen syndrome which you can see. And any of these patterns seen in a T wave, you should be cautious as such. Now, another cautious, now I'm just picking up those conditions where you have to be more alert as such. If at all there is a ECG with a ST elevation and hyperacute T waves are very prominent and ST segment is elevated, and particularly the ST segment is elevated in lead 1 and AVL, as you see over here, and it's also depressed in lead 3. If the ST T wave is depressed in lead 3, that suggests you of a hyperacute anteroseptal ST segment elevated myocardial infarction. This hyperacute anteroseptal myocardial infarction often results in involvement of the conduction system, particularly the Purkinje fibers or maybe the bundle of hits, and a cardiac arrest, sudden death can occur. Those patients who have a sudden cardiac death within a short duration of onset of these cardiac symptoms, often it's about the anteroseptal defect, including the famous celebrity who had died recently, Phil Mac. Now, anyway, that's another area where you have to be extremely cautious. I repeat, ST elevation in and V2 and V4, and ST elevation in lead 1 and ABL with the ST depression in the lead 3, if at all these two findings are seen. And of course, that third finding, like Q waves in the septal leads, is not a very critical issue. It also confirms the features of acute anteroseptal ST segment elevated MI, where the condition is critical. There is always a risk of sudden development of a cardiac arrest. Either it may turn out into a ventricular fibrillation within a short duration as such. An anterior MI, now this also is another of the critical condition, anterior or anteroseptal. Anteroseptal is more critical. Anterior MI also is critical, where you may have the similar hyperacute T waves in V2 and V6, particularly the chest leads, and significantly marked in the middle leads, V2 and V3, the middle line, middle leads, and the R wave height is reduced. There is a tendency for the R wave heights to be reduced. This also suggests of a severe risk. Now, in this ECG, that anterior MI has resulted in a block also, first degree AV block also has occurred. So once there is a AV tendency for the AV block, usually you have more time. It may not result in a cardiac arrest, but if there is no AV block, then there is a possibility, high risk of cardiac arrest. So anterior MI, anterior septal MI, these are the two conditions where there can be sudden death. If at all there is a block already developed in the AV area, then the chances that the patient may have a ventricular beating and ventricular contractions may keep the patient alive. So you may have more time. Whereas if there is no block, then it's a condition where there is a possibility, high risk of sudden death, and the patient needs an immediate care in the ICU and continuous monitoring and so on. So that's about the same. Now, in that patient, in the same patient, this is a recording from the same patient, taken after about 40 to 50 minutes. What happens is the AV block has become almost complete there, and hence there is a rhythm of that QRS complex rhythm has been altered. The QRS complex occurs as a regular rhythm. That's ventricular contractions are occurring at their own rate, and as such, a few of the ectopic preventricular contractions are seen. Here you can see this, but majority of these rhythm otherwise is almost normal, but peak Q interval is regularly getting altered. That suggests you have a block there, and though there is a progressive ST segment elevation, there is a progressive ST segment elevation, particularly in V2 and V5, that suggests of about a slight extension of the lesion, but still the patient is not in acute risk as such. That's the issue. Of course, another example of the anterolateral STMA. These are the same issues. Only thing is, it's about the variation in the pattern. ST elevation seen in V2 to V6, particularly in the chest leads, but towards the left leads, the prominence is seen, and ST segment depression in lead 3 is suggestive of anterolateral STMA, particularly acute condition. And it's also called as tombstoning, extensive anterior MA, where the changes are very significant, huge occurs, but still the conducting system is saved. So this is one issue. Most of the times, by the time the patient would have a extensive anterior MA, some conduction system would be affected, and hence there is a possibility of either a fibrillation or cardiac arrest. But in this case, there is a massive ST elevation. The ST elevation is quite huge, and hence the shape has become totally altered, and hence this is called as a tombstone. Tombstone, it represents both literal meaning as well as comparative meaning, because literal meaning in the sense the chances of death are quite high in such cases. So one or other within a short duration, you have to prepare for the tombstone. That's the issue. But particularly when the changes are seen more in the chest leads V1 to V6, and the AVL area also, the left leads also, it's seen quite significantly. That suggests you have an anterior MA. So in general, anterior MA is more risky than the other way. Lateral STMA or lateral MA infarctions, the changes which are seen in the lead 1 to AVL, ST elevation is more seen in lead 1 and AVL. Comparatively, the changes seen in the chest leads are lesser. It's not that the chest leads are free, but when you see the maximum changes in lead 1 to AVL and some changes in the T waves of thoracic segment or this precordial lead asset, then that's considered as a lateral STMA or lateral ST segment elevated MA. I don't say that the patient is safe, but comparatively, you will have more time to plan the treatment. There may not be an immediate risk for the death in such conditions as such. Similarly, another example of the same similar issue, only the thing is about the slight variation in the intensity of the lesion. ST elevation is seen in the lead 1 AVL. In the lead 1 AVL as such, you can see the changes seen in this ECG, and ST depression in lead 3 and AVF. This also is the same thing. Along with that, a Q wave formation in the chest leads, typical Q wave formation in the V1 and V4 leads as such. That's suggestive of again a lateral STMA. And another example, of course, these are all the same issue. The only issue is about slight variation in the presentation. In the hyperacute anterolateral STMA, this is hyperacute in the sense the course is quite short. Of course, this doesn't really is not reflected by the ECG. That's about the clinical presentation, hyperacute conditions, where within a short duration the changes do occur, and it's a ST elevation and hyperacute T waves in mainly the anteroseptal leads. That's V1 to V4 leads as such, and the high lateral leads like the lead 1 and AVL. This also there will be a straight elevation. The only thing is this elevation might be missed as such quite frequently, so you have to keenly observe these areas. ST depression in the lead 2 and lead 3 important to make the ST elevation, confirm the ST elevation. So that's the lead 3, the ST depression has to be made out clearly, and it's a suggestion of an early stage of a huge infarction, a large infarction as such. So these are all the possible variations. But in summary, it's about the identification of the ST segment elevation in any of the leads. Even if you are not able to make out whether it is anterior, posterior, or lateral MI or inferior MI, if you are able to identify MI, that's good enough from the clinical management point of view most of the times. Location of the MI is not a very critical issue in the present day's clinical practice. Of course, inferior MI, it shows mainly the changes in the middle leads, V2 leads. Of course, in the history or in the olden days, there was a practice of keeping the leads on the posterior side, back to, and then recording the ECG whenever you have a significant depression in the V2, and hence the changes could be seen quite significantly over the area. But at present, I don't see that kind of a practice existing as such. In an anterior aisle infarction, this could be another variation. These are all the things which we have discussed already. There could be a notching of the QS complex, a P wave, current of injury seen in the beginning, in early stage, which is the usual phenomena. In the early stage, you see the ST segment elevation, but occasionally you may see the early changes in the Q wave, also Q wave formation in the QS complex. You may see a notch, and this also could be presented along with the other signs, or at times there could be a slight variation as such. These are all the some variations. Now, another example, a evolving infarction. In the initial stages, the T waves are prominent. Gradually, as the condition progresses, you will see the changes of the T waves becoming more spiked, see, as such. And the ST segment, of course, gradually changing its shape. That's all we as such. So that's about the infarction. Then the last part is about the T wave abnormalities which can occur, which we have already discussed all these. The names could be, you may see these names: peak T waves, hyperacute, inverted, biphasic, camel hump, or the tombstone. So these are all the different names which are used that do not make much of a situation and importance as such. A hyperacute T waves without ST segment elevation can occur in hyperkalemia. We have discussed this already, but I have given this example to again repeated this example to make out that difference. In a hyperacute, this hyperkalemia condition, we have you may have a hyperacute T wave, but ST segment is not altered or is not elevated. So at times you may find some difficulty in making out the differences between a hyperkalemia and infarction. So in such conditions, you have to depend upon the biochemical parameters. Biochemical parameters are mainly the cardiac enzymes. Cardiac enzymes would be whenever there is a destruction of the muscles, heart muscles, the enzymes present in the heart would be released, and among them the most important are the creatine kinase, CKMB, and troponin. These are the significant important ones which suggest of an acute injury. Then aldactyls would be seen in the later phases as such. So whenever you have such a doubt, the biochemical investigations would be of some help as such. Now, this also is another example. I think we can skip this so that we can save some time. Now, this is again not very clinically significant, but hypothermic changes virtually in our practice, you may not see a hypothermic condition. But if at all you are practicing in an extremely cold area where the person would be possibly exposed like a mountaineering and so on, a possibility of hypothermia can occur. And in that hypothermic condition too, there would be a ST segment elevation. And it's virtually a ischemia only. In a hypothermic condition too, it's the ischemia due to reduced blood flow as a result of the vasoconstriction. So not significant different, but there may not be an infarction. The patient may recover well after you have brought the temperature back to the normal. So even in that hypothermic conditions, though it may not be a typical infarction, I would not say that so that's a very controversial issue, like to consider hypothermia as an infarct or not. Anyway, there will be a reduced blood flow and the impaired oxygen supply and demand, and hence the same changes, ST segment elevations, can occur in hypothermia too. Now, another is a cardiac arrest and resuscitation. So once you have a patient with cardiac arrest and you have resuscitated the patient, either with the manual compression or it could be by the electrical defibrillation, there is a possibility that suppose you have the patient gradually recovering. Now, the recovering waves in the initial stages may be abnormal. You may not see the real changes of the wave pattern normally. You may have some R waves seen, but once you have this kind of a spike in a patient where you are doing this cardiac resuscitation, you can expect that the patient may gradually recover. As the patient gradually recovers, you may have a rhythmic pattern of the R wave seen. So that's all the point as such. Then one more to complete the ECG discussion, though not very clinically important, the ECG in children, neonatal conditions, may not have the same rules as we have discussed. In a newborn ECG, the QRS complexes are very narrow, heart rate is usually high, and the axis is deviated more towards the right side because in the newborn, the pulmonary circulation is the most important issue, and the ventricular circulation gets established later. So you will have a right axis deviation, and a QRS complex is very sharp, and the rate is quite high, usually around 100, 120 or so on. So this need not be considered as abnormal. And again, as the child develops, as gradually the age progresses, you will see certain changes. This is called as a juvenile pattern, where the T waves may become inverted. Heart rate, of course, is high, and even in the age up to the age of around 50 to 60 years, even there could be a RSR pattern, like the QRS complex may have some changes which show some abnormal waves in between. QRS complex may have a bifid wave which may suspect like a bundle branch block, but this is normal. And particularly in V1, in the right leads, you may see this kind of a QRS complex where it may be bispid, but it need not be considered as an abnormal thing in a pediatric ECG as in a age less than 1 year. Now, as the age progresses, you will have the same. There is a gradual reduction of the pulse rate. So by the age of around 1 year, the pulse rate would be less than 150 beats per minute. Of course, right axis deviation remains back as such. T wave inversion in V1 to V3 is a normal phenomenon during that stage because there is a right axis deviation. And the R waves in right leads like V1 would be more prominent than the left leads, which is again a suggestion of the right axis deviation. QRS complexes will be much narrower than the adults. By the age of 5 years, gradually the changes will be coming down. Pulse rate reduces to around 90 or 86, so on, and the QRS gradually it becomes wider compared to the previous. T wave inversion in V2 is still persisting. This is considered as normal in the age of 5. By the time the patient reaches age of 10, the pattern would be of a normal pattern where the shift of the axis towards the left side is quite visible. So that's another of the important issue which you have to keep in mind. With this, we can conclude the ECG class. Before concluding the ECG class, important is the limitations of the ECG should never be forgotten. ECG is only recording the electrical activity. It doesn't really measure the mechanical function of the heart. It's not like whether you cannot make out whether the heart is really pumping properly or not by the ECG, and hence it's always important that the final decision has to be taken by the clinical assessment, total history taking, a proper auscultation. These will be always the real key for clinical success than the ECG. ECG may just help you to make the decision. It's quite possible that you may have a good number of patients with severe acute pulmonary edema but may have a normal ECG, or the other way where the patient may have a gross abnormal ECG but the patient may have a normal cardiac function. Both these are possible, and this fact has to be kept in mind and never depend upon ECG alone to make the final decision in clinical handling of the patient. And it doesn't really depict the abnormalities of a cardiac structure. You cannot make use of the ECG to make out the diagnosis like septal defects or heart valves. Practically, from the clinical point of view, you will have more of such patients where the septal defects or heart valve defects coming than really the ischemia many times. And whatever we interpret in such conditions would be only the indirect interpretation, like the impact on the walls of the heart as such, or myocardial thickness. So if there is a left to right shunt, there is a possibility that the right side will become hypertrophied, tendency for the shift to the right. Or at times it could be even like the patient's conditions like these abnormal waves may produce the complications like embolism, which can be fatal, but that cannot be made out with the ECG. ECG can never be useful to make out the embolism like conditions or the abnormalities of the circulation that cannot be made out with the ECG. So all that whatever we may take the help of the ECG in such group of conditions would be only the indirect help to consider about the possible dimensions of the heart as such, but not really useful. In such conditions, echocardiography would be the more useful investigation than really the ECG. And it doesn't really record all the heart's electrical activity. This also is, I think this is one I have told in the beginning also. The electrodes placed on the surface of the body record only the currents that are transmitted to the surface of the body, but there are many other structures in the body which produce the current as such. Muscles, every skeletal muscle will be producing the electrical current, and hence whatever you record as the ECG is only the resultant effect of all these noises. You will have all that noise, and the current produced from the heart is considered as the loudest of the noise, and you record that. And hence, there is always a scope for confusion, and this has the severe limitations. Even in spite of the limitations, used judiciously, ECG can be a very useful tool to make the diagnosis and save the patient's assets. With this, I think we can conclude. If there are any questions, there could be some questions. And my hope is, at the end of this class, you should be able to make out whether a given ECG is normal or abnormal. Whether you will be able to make an exact diagnosis in every case or not is not really the target. Then there are some questions. When the patient is having a chest pain, within how many hours it should be treated? So I think the most important thing in a patient presenting with chest pain is to decide whether the patient has an ischemic pathology or not. And whenever there is an ischemia, earlier the better. The usual rule now, the popular statement now is the golden hour. First 1 hour is considered as very critical for reperfusion. But whether the reperfusion really helps or not is again the question mark. So I can just say that which is the time limit. But usually the better, earlier the better. That's the treatment. That is the rule to involve with the treatment or intervene as such. But the most critical issue is to decide whether the patient has really a cardiac pathology or whether the chest pain is produced due to other conditions. This becomes quite difficult, and ECG can help in that condition as such. Then, sir, patients with the pacemaker, will there be any changes in ECG? Yes, definitely yes. See, pacemakers, there will be no SA node in that. Instead of the SA node, you will have the pacemaker, and hence in the pacemakers, the rhythm is based upon the functionality of the pacemaker. If the battery of the pacemaker becomes weak or something goes wrong in that mechanical instrument, then the rhythm may be altered. Otherwise, the rhythm will be remaining normal, remaining same as such. With the pacemakers, another risk is you may not be able to identify certain of the ischemic changes in the heart or abnormalities of the heart, because in the normal conditions, in a normal person, the rate of the heart would be regulated according to the demand of the oxygen. When you do more exercise, the pulse rate increases, and that pulse rate increase is to compensate with that increased oxygen demand. And of course, during rest, the pulse rate will be diminished. But in a patient on pacemaker, the heart may not be able to respond to these kinds of the physical needs, and hence there is always a high risk of precipitating of cardiac complications if the patient doesn't keep a control over the extent of the exercise. And only the thing is, with the pacemaker, patient may not have a cardiac arrest, but damage to the muscles can continue in a pacemaker, and that's one of the major problems with the pacemakers as such. Then if a patient has cardiac attack, what would be the first step to be done? So with that word cardiac attack, I think it's not a very proper word. But anyway, the first of the thing is the patient, you need to ensure that the oxygen demand doesn't raise. So the immediate first aid to any patient who has a myocardial ischemia is ensure that the oxygen demand of the heart muscle doesn't increase. And one of the easiest is bed rest. So patient is given full rest asset, should not be mobilized further. Any activity, physical activity can increase the oxygen demand. Then the next part is try to improve the oxygenation. So naturally, the oxygen given through nasal route, though it may not be directly helping, but because it improves the oxygenation, you have a possibility that the patient's cardiac muscles may get better oxygen. Then the next is confirm that the muscles get a better oxygen, and this is done by the direct intervention. So you have that interventional treatment like angiography and then clot busting treatment, so on. So you have to do the angiography. That's the next part of the treatment. But before the patient goes to that facility, where you can have the angiography and then the direct interventional treatment, you may have to plan about the conservative management where life can be saved. And life can be saved by preventing a possibility of the shock. One of the common causes for the shock in case of the cardiac pathology is pain itself. The pain is so severe. So narcotic analgesics are usually preferred as a supportive treatment to prevent the complications. Another major complication would be pulmonary edema. Because the heart may fail to pump properly, the lungs may become congested. So to reduce that congestion, you may give a diuretic. That's the usual medical management. And these medical management are not a treatment for infarction or myocardial pathology. These are the managements by which you can buy time. Then the other issue like coronary dilators, vasodilators. Of course, vasodilators can help to a certain extent, but there is a questionable issue. See, vasodilators can help in a angina condition where there is a moderate ischemia, because the vessels, once they dilate, the blood flow may improve. But there is another controversy is when you administer vasodilators, the blood pressure gets reduced. So whether there is a real net gain in the blood flow or not is questionable. Vessels may get dilated, but as the pressure reduces, the amount of the blood flowing to the muscles may not change as such. So this is a question mark, but still conventionally you give these vasodilators like nitrates. Nitrates are usually given as another part of the treatment. Then of course, one more part of the treatment is considering this as a clot. And once there is a possibility of a vasospasm and clot formation, to prevent further clot formation, anticoagulants. So these are the other supportive treatment which can be given in a patient of cardiac pathology. But ultimately, the issue is to decide whether the patient requires a reperfusion, interventional reperfusion, and if it is needed, it has to be done properly. Again, the issue is whether the reperfusion or interventional treatment will help or not depends upon the status of the cardiac muscles. If the cardiac muscles are already diseased, very old patient, and having previous episodes, multiple episodes of ischemia and hypertension and so on, intervention may not help much. Like your reperfusion treatment may not help much. Whereas if the patient is relatively younger and the cardiac muscles otherwise are healthy, a reperfusion can help. So these are all the controversial issues of managing the patient of ischemic heart disease. I think in brief, I think I have covered that issue. Then is it normal to hear S3 heart sounds in children? Yeah, of course. That's the true. That's absolutely true. To have a S3 third sound in a heart children, that's the split second sound, is a common in pediatric practice. Pediatric auscultatory findings you may have, and the sounds are different from the adults. Right. That's it. That's again. If you have a similar findings in adults, you will consider that it's a right ventricular hypertrophy. In children, naturally, the right axis is more stronger than the left axis. Right. That's another question, I think. If there are no more questions, we can wind up a bit early today. Right. Okay, fine. Then there are no questions, so we'll wind up today.
Thank you, sir.